Welcome to the World Builders Anvil, Season 2, Episode 19, Finishing the Framework. Don't know where to start building your fantasy world?
Do you need more? Does it make sense?
Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination.
This is the place where we will prime your mind.
Now, it's time to heat up the forge.
Break out the mithril ingots and hammer.
Welcome to the World Builders Anvil. I'm Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And I'm Michael Miller.
Let's sup from the muck of Java and build. Now, my name is Jeffrey W. Ingram, and I'm really ready to get going.
Michael Miller, and I have been working on these frames for so long. Can I just finish these frames, Jeff? You've been having me work on these frames for all this time, and I am getting tired.
No. You can never finish your frames. Your frames are never done until your world is done. Michael wants it all wrapped up in a nice little bow.
I want to put a bow on it.
No bow. It's not bow-tific.
Jeff's anti-bow today. I'm not happy about this. Christmas, all the bows. But right now, no bows.
If I don't get Christmas presents, there are no bows. But yeah, here's the thing to keep in mind when you're making a framework. The framework, in theory, should never be finished. And even when you're done with the world, you'll probably have stuff that you've started working on that is a potential use, but you've never fleshed out the details of. So the framework you might never be done with. The detail stuff that you need to provide the story or stories that you're doing will get done if you finish your project. But right now, we don't really have the details. We have just enough to kind of get the mind around a subject. That's the whole point of frameworks. So the first thing you have to keep in mind is this is a process that's not done. So first off, you don't need to have good answers for all of the questions. Sometimes, it's like if you don't know the when for something, it's okay. If you don't know the why for something, or if you have a really like why because they need it, might be the why. All of your answers won't necessarily be good.
Why? Because I like it.
Why? Because I like it.
Just cause.
That's a valid why. Just cause. Now, as you're fleshing it out, you want to get more out of it. But when you're building a framework, the way it is different from a framework for actually constructing a house is that if this is shaky and faulty, you can repair it quite easily at any point until it's canon. And even then, you just retcon something, right? That's what all the big universes do. So why can't you? So ultimately, you come up with a reason to change something, and you come up with a story reason, or you can just ignore the fact that you've done something in the past, or go, oh, that's from a flawed perspective. That character just doesn't understand. When they presented the information earlier. So there are many ways that you can change a framework when you are really fleshing out the details. It doesn't need to be perfect. This is the least important part to be perfect. Is to let you have enough information that when you're trying to come up with the details, you have a reference point, an anchor to hold on to with it. So you kind of don't end up with like 17 cultures that are all basically the same thing, but you stress different words in sentences, and that's the only real difference. If you want to make things different, you need something to anchor your mind onto, or else they all end up what you're familiar with in your brain. So it's all you're trying to get here, folks. Now, the other thing to remember is there are 5 points of contact. You're not ready to start the 5th part yet. If you're doing an improv story, yeah, you probably could. But the 5th contact is always to begin your project. We're not there yet. But there's a few things that I suggest that is a good idea to go through for the things that you've created to make sure that you're really ready to go deeper. And one is revisit the first contact, which is kind of the overview of it, and say, you're supposed to determine your frame, the area you want to explore. Does that match with what you've made? Because sometimes it's like you start working on something and you creep away from the intention when you begin. Now, the whole point you went through this in the first place is to kind of prevent you from doing that. But I've worked on I don't know, a lot of different like IT projects in my life and a lot of different world building projects. And one thing I find whenever you're in a project, even if it only involves you, the scope creeps. It changes. And sometimes it's a needed change. And sometimes it's just like you try and get every feature in there to make it as appealing as you can to everyone, but then you end up creating something that really doesn't do anything for anyone. So
what I find is that I either get more or less excited by the original idea, and I refine the original idea, or I think of something better and want to abandon the original idea, forcing me to debate whether or not I want to start over.
Yeah, and that's true, because this is a good point to go. This isn't as interesting as I thought, and I'm on track, but maybe it's boring.
Yeah.
Or at least now I'm not ready to do it now. Or it's like, you know, I'm really excited, but I'm looking at like a lot of things I come up with. I have some really good ideas here that don't fit. Maybe I have to cut some ideas out. That doesn't mean they're gone forever. That means for this project, you know, that 34th nation you came up with, you don't need. Maybe you only need 33 nations. So you hold on that, you know, you put that in your playbook. And later on, when you're looking for inspiration, you can kind of go back and revisit all of your frameworks and go, oh, this will make sense here. This will make sense here. You know, it's going to be retweaked into this world, but, you know, I think this will work in this project. I liked the idea before. So just because you get rid of an idea doesn't mean you won't use it at some point. It just means it's not ready now. And for any of you who've ever told stories, especially if you write down stories, you end up with a lot of things that is garbage. And a lot of times it's garbage in the context of what you're doing. You know, so it's like, you know, it's like a very interesting scene, but there's really no point for it, or it doesn't feel right towards the theme you're working on or whatever. The same way in storytelling, like characters and scenes you hold on to for reuse at later date. The frames that you do and don't use can be saved to be brought back up for a different project later on too, as a seed idea to go, does this fit or does this not fit? So keep in mind is revisit your basic idea. Like Michael said, sometimes the idea isn't exciting anymore, especially if you're planning to write a novel. You better be excited at this point. Like, oh God, I need to know more. You know, until you're done with your first draft, if you don't want to know more, you're going to get in trouble. If you're trying to write a novel, you know, if you're getting through this part, you're like, I'm kind of bored already. It's something's not right yet. So this is the time to play around. This is the time to go, this isn't exactly what I want to do. Make changes to your core idea, or make changes to the details, cut some of the details, or go, oh, wait, you know, now I'm looking at it from this big picture standpoint. I see this hole in the framework I can just fill right now. And you'll notice too, like if you go back to the Not So Waterworld Let's Build episodes we've done so far, we've talked about more things than we've actually created frameworks for. And even when you're world building, you don't necessarily need all of the frameworks for all of the ideas you've had to go, okay, this other one, you know, like, you know, this invasion, if I do an invasion story, is probably going to be a second chapter. It's probably going to be a part 2. So, you know, let me not so much worry about that. I'm going to sit there and I'm going to come up with an actual that culture later on, because, you know, they're not going to even be, they're only going to be theorized about the historic perspective of them in the first act. You know, maybe the first act you don't even get into. At the end of the first act is maybe the arrival of the invasion. You know, that's probably a very appropriate place to bring in the invasion. Isn't after chapter 1 or at the beginning of chapter 1, but it's maybe after the first act. Like you're trying to really establish what the world was like and all of this stuff, and so the readers have some understanding of the continuity and normality before you break it in the second act. So don't rush your storytelling, but 2, you know, sit there and realize that you don't even need all the framework fleshed out to begin getting past the framework. You just need enough to get started. You need a basic idea of that central frame that you create at the beginning Do you have enough things to start coming in for the details in just that point? Once you have enough for just that point, you can start getting in deeper, and then it becomes your choice. If you like doing big stuff, abstractly, spend more time in the framework, or kind of go back and forth. Don't get stuck in having to go top down. Don't get stuck in having to go bottom up. Don't ever get stuck. Be flexible as you do these things. Now, the next thing here is under the second contact. You need a frame outline. You need an outline for the frame. And so for most people, it's going to be like a chapter outline. Even if you're doing like an RPG type of story, you're still going to have a story arc, or you should, if you're really doing an actual story. It's not going to be, there's a point to go into the Dungeons and Dragons. It's not just because, well, it might be as simple as the king just asked you to go do it. But if you're doing an actual story in your RPG games, then you actually need a proper story arc, the same way as you would for a novel. Just the problem is you have a lot of other authors who screw it up for you, which is fun. But remember, in that second contact, make sure that you have a decent outline of your frame going forward. That way you kind of know, what are all the things I need? Do I really have them all? But as you're doing your overview, make sure that that's fleshed out. And under your third contact, identify your needs. So you have frameworks for some of them. You maybe have developed a couple cultures, which we've not done yet. Maybe some religions. We've
got a couple of skeletal ideas. Yeah, we haven't officially.
We fleshed out a race, and we had ideas in there of what cultures might be. But we never fleshed out cultures. We never fleshed out religions, even though I'd say in both of our minds, we both have an opinion already. That's the way this works, is it starts to create the picture in your mind. And mine are correct pictures, and Michael's are maybe correct. It depends on how well they match up with mine.
It sounds like that's an always theme here, though.
That's the World Builders Anvil theme.
That's like no matter what. It's like, do you agree with me? No, then you're wrong.
Then you're wrong. The next one's languages. This is one I always tell people, you don't have to overthink. It's really easy to make them now. So it's kind of cool to do, but it's cool when you're creating a culture to think about how they speak or how they talk, really, and go, do they talk subject, verb, noun, object, verb, subject? Those things can tell you something about people. The way they speak says something about the people, so even if it's only a meta level language, they're good to have to understand your cultures, states, people, your characters, do you have all of the places thought out geographically in the area? Do you have a good map of the area that you're in? All of these things, is like, do you have these needs? What are the needs you have? Do you have frameworks enough to cover your frame, your central frame to start? In the fourth and fifth contact, you're not going to spend so much time here again. So you can go. So don't worry so much about going through all your 5 contact points. This whole process, you get through all of the points, but you want to review those first 3 definitely, and definitely those 3 points in there. To determine, your central frame. Have an outline for it and identify your needs, and realize that if the need isn't immediate, you don't even need a framework for it to start. If you are inspired for one, do it. If you want to jump into the details, Michael's a detail guy. For me, I need details to start latching on to make this world its own thing. So for me, I like to have this big, broad, top level stuff, but I like to have some very specific details as well, like goals I'm moving towards, or else I sometimes get lost because I like to world build.
Jeff likes to have a map.
I like
very important to have a map for Jeff. For me, I could have an idea of a piece of the geography. Like, I'm going to think about it like, oh, well, all right, the story is going to be about a guy. So I'm already thinking about minutia. I'm thinking about a singular character And then I need to be like, okay, well, where does he live? So he lives in the capital city. So now there's a capital city, which means there's an established culture and a country.
Mhm.
So I'm down in the dirt, whereas Jeff's like way up in the clouds going, what does the entire planet look like? For me, the geography is not as important until I start needing it.
Yeah, and then your world's just all wrong afterwards. No,
I think this is one of those parts where I'm disagreeing with you.
Example,
so yeah,
world building is never wrong if you do it with intention that works for you, meaning the way I say. No.
And just, you know, for those of you that are new, I always throw out the caveat out there that I try to be the avatar for the listener on the show. I don't always think it's appropriate for me to call myself a world builder because I don't actually do a whole lot of world building myself. So for me, it's not much anymore. For me, it's more about like consuming. So, I mean, I certainly love to create, and I certainly love to interact with, you know, built worlds, and or, you know, Jeff and I get to do this and create a world together here. So I think I might have lost my point along the way here.
Because you're wrong.
Well, just because I know that there's people out there that have built a whole ton of worlds, and I haven't. So I sometimes feel a little weird offering advice or perspective when there's people out there with a lot more experience actually doing it than me. But for me, I'm coming from the perspective of I'm the guy that you want to sell your product to. I'm the guy who loves this stuff, and if you make it right, I'll buy it.
Yeah.
So
that's the whole reason.
I'm coming from.
That's one of the primary reasons I chose Michael to do this, was because he is a consummate consumer, and he's knowledgeable he has the creative skills. I know that, but he loves consuming. So the benefit of having him here is, you know, it's like, so because sometimes ultimately, if it's not commercial enough, no one buys it. You know, it might be you're the audience for your work, and if that's okay with you, that's fine. There's
a great analogy in the guitar world where there are these guys that are just amazing, but they're technical. So like they're these just incredible shredders where they just rip the guitar apart. Their fingers are so fast, and they can play chords that most people never bother even remotely approaching to learn how to do. They're physically difficult. They're challenging both physically and like technically as you're going to learn it and to execute
the progression of it. Yeah.
And not only that, but they're doing a pile of them in seconds. So technically speaking, they're an astounding guitarist, but the music sounds like crap. So it's like, yes, technically you are amazing, but no one wants to listen to the song. So that's something to be important. There's a lot of people that build amazing worlds. It's like, wow, this is so detailed. This is so well thought out, but I don't want to spend time there. I don't want to read the story. I don't want to buy the source books. It's thorough, you know, and I respect it, but I'm not enjoying it. And I think that that's really something that we have to take into consideration. And I never take it away from people. I've said it 100 times. If you just want to world build for world build's sake, if you're just making it for yourself, have at it. I will never take that away from anybody. But if you intend to make a product, I hope that I can help with that from a perspective standpoint.
Yeah, this goes back to a story that one of my friends, who I won't say their name because I've not asked permission to talk about the story, but was world building and not world building. They got invited to play a game, and the guy wanted to explore silicon-based life forms. And
I'm aware of this.
And so, like a very sci-fi hard kind of game, and the guy's a consummate player, so he had no issues playing the game, but it bored the hell out of him. Excuse my language. It bored him because there was nothing for him to understand enough in there for him to enjoy himself. So he played a little bit and had fun with the people he was there with, but never got into the world or the story. It made no sense to him. And ultimately, storytelling is really tough, especially if it's written. The less points of interaction you have with the person, the harder it becomes. if you break patterns that people understand, it's harder for them to consume the material, and so if you want them to consume this novel thing in this one spot, if you have a lot of novel things in a lot of spots, people have to use a lot of brain power to get through it. And you might have a great novel that's a technical achievement that hurts people's brains to read. Like I remember I bought an economics book because I want to read. I heard this economist was like a brilliant economist. And so I was trying to understand more of it. And I bought his book and it hurt my brain when I read the book. It physically, my brain swelled and exploded 3 times.
I think you might be exaggerating a little on this.
I might be exaggerating a little bit, but the point being is like, I'm sure he's brilliant. And when people dumb it down to my language, I get the points, but reading the way he presented them, I didn't get it. I was lost after the first chapter. So, just keep this in mind as you go forward with your world building projects. And remember that the frame is, like I said, it's technically not done for the not so Waterworld, and that's okay. But one of the things I think you have to consider here, irregardless, before you go on, and this is a flaw of our work here, is we don't have a story outline in mind, which isn't bad for what we've been working on. But if we really want to get any deeper, even if the intention is not to deliver the story, it's like we need points we need to lock ourselves onto.
Yeah, we're looking for a reason to create the next thing as opposed to just creating willy-nilly, because that you just get into pure world building at that point, which again is fine. But if you're trying to create something to share or to sell, you need to get a little more specific. So we need something to anchor a perspective and anchor. It's like, okay, like what I was saying, I need a guy in the capital city. I'm going to tell a story about that guy and his culture. So now I have things that I need to do now. I've already got a whole list. Just saying that to one sentence, I have a whole list of things I need to create. I need to create a culture. I need to create a city. If I'm Jeff, I'm going to create the whole planet and the continents. I need to create this guy, so I'm going to want to know his background, family, why he's interesting, and why we want to follow a story in his life. So there's a whole bunch of things there just off of that one sentence for us to go on. But if we don't create that one sentence, we're just like, oh, so do you want to work on bugs today, or maybe foliage? Like, what are we building?
Yes. Well, exactly. And my suggestion is, if it's not something you're planning to share, have an educational goal. Like, I want to learn more about how the world works, how plate tectonics work. So you focus on the geology of your world. But if you don't have a goal, and this goes well in life too, if you don't have a goal that you're moving towards, you're not moving towards anything. You're probably just kind of meandering in a circle. So, it's always good to have a goal in creation, as much as in like financial goals or job goals or whatever the goals are. Always have a goal, something you're moving towards, or else you're never really moving.
And that's like part of the universal law of attraction. That's a life thing too. I had a great discussion with a friend of mine a long time ago about his romantic life, and I was like, well, what are you looking for? And he's like, well, I don't really know, and I'm like, so like, what kind of people have you been dating in the past year? And he goes, well, this girl was like this girl was like that. And he's describing vastly different people. And I'm like, so you don't really know what you're looking for? And he's like, no, not really. I'm like, so how's that working out for you? He doesn't really know what he's looking for. So that's exactly what he's finding. I'm like, take a look at my relationship. My wife is a very kind person. She's a very attractive, long-haired brunette. That's what I was looking for. You know what I mean?
Sometimes too, you have a goal, you get there, you realize it's not the right goal, but then it's okay because it's not the right goal, and you can change the goal. Right,
but it's the whole concept of having something to focus on. Like, you learn about a new particular model of car, and suddenly you see it everywhere. They were always there. They just were not on your radar. So it's the same thing with anything else. So with your world building, you're going to be all over the map if you don't, pick something to anchor you.
Yeah, that's why years ago when my wife and I were working on a thing we called the full focus planner. The idea was you needed to know where you wanted to be in all the aspects of your life in every category, and then you come up with things to get you closer to those. So you're always moving closer, even if it's slow. You're just always progressing towards this far future thing. And it was interesting when we would talk to people going through it. It's like the further they were away from something, the smaller their dreams were. But then once they would get a little bit of momentum, they would realize that, oh, I'm almost there. And then they keep pushing out as well, to try and, always have that thing that you're moving towards, or else, that's why I think some people, when they retire from their jobs, they die very quickly because they lose their point of living, which is sad to say, but some people are like that.
Yeah, it's very common. I talk about that with my wife too. I'm just like, I can't wait to retire. I've got so many things I want to do.
Yeah, you just gotta be moving somewhere all of the time. I believe
work is just getting.
And I'm
way.
not a medical doctor, so this is not medical advice, or legal or financial advice. But now back to consider a full story outline. So yeah, and that was a whole story telling you that you need to have a story or some other goal that you're moving towards in your world, or else I will talk for a really long time, and that is a threat.
That's a promise. You're going to talk for a really long time, regardless.
And here's the thing. Here's a promise. As we're approaching the end of season 2, is revisit your framework as needed. And you're going to add to it as needed. And so the interesting thing is, season 2 is always going to be about framework. So if we come up to something and we're like, oh wow, we don't really have any basics here, we're going to actually release another season 2 episode maybe in 3 years. We might be on season 7 at the time.
Yeah,
but we're going to release another season 2 episode if we do more framework. And framework will be one I always go back to.
Yeah, Jeff told me this the other day, and I'm like, you're going to make this show so much more confusing.
For us. But I think for the consumer, it'll hopefully make it easier.
I think it will, based on what you're telling me about it. I do think it will. It'll just be funny for us, and technically when we're like editing.
And especially, it's like we've had enough trouble saying season 2, episode 19.
Oh yeah, just when we record the show at the very beginning. Okay,
so we're going to do season 24.
Thank you for tuning in to episode 2. Season 2, episode 19.
Yeah. So hopefully we'll have a lot more fun with episode numbers. We might actually just start saving all of the errors on the episode numbers as we start having more and more seasons, just so you guys can enjoy that fun too. Yeah. So, very briefly, remember, you're not done. You should never be done with this framework. Have a goal of what you're working towards. Make sure your world building project plays into that, and then have a goal that you're moving towards. Because even if you get through a story and you want to do more world building, you can do that in a framework world, especially because you have these other pieces that are starting to give you ideas for more stories going forward. So always keep in mind, like the story we've been talking about here, sounds a lot more like a hero's journey kind of story or an epic fantasy story. One of those two probably. And we'll get to that when we actually create the story outline, which that will be probably the end of the season. But when we do that,
so like one of the next
two episodes. Episode 21.
Yeah.
So there we go, folks. So that's why I had the 21st episode, because I thought we needed the story outline.
Can we call it episode 20 part 2?
No,
never. Can't do that. All right.
Because I can't put that into Libsyn that way, so that won't work.
Gotcha.
That's right. And so now,
what's a world building task?
Outline a story for your world now, and it has to at least be a decent chapter outline. It doesn't have to be much more than that, especially if you're not planning to write a story. But, you're talking about like 40 or 50 chapters, maybe. It's fantasy, folks. Come on, right? Like a fantasy novel is like 40, 50 chapters. So get going. And realize that you might start off, especially if you're not planning a story, is just you don't put numbers to them. Just plan out all of the chapters that are going to be like the core story, your main plot. and then sit there and go, okay, what are the characters I need? What are the places and locations? And go, okay, maybe I want some chapters, a subplot to help expose more of this location. Maybe I want a subplot to tell more about one of these other characters. Maybe I want a subplot to go to the grocery store because, it's fantasy games. You have to buy stuff, right?
Because the grocery store is awesome.
Grocery stores, every game session that goes where characters go shopping are always the best in role-playing games.
I'm really hoping that it's sarcasm.
But yeah, no. But sit there, like I said, work on your core story, and then just start going. Okay, I have let's say 20 chapters of my core story. Okay, now let me do a side plot on this other character. Because I want to flesh out that character more. It'll beef up the main plot. So if I take these characters and I now have subplots around 3 characters. So keep that in mind. It'll add richness into your world. It'll add richness into your stories too. So and then layer that story in there, and so now you're up to like maybe, say 30, and then you do a couple locations, you do some backstory, you're up to like 60 chapters. If you're up to 60 chapters and you're playing 40 to 50, you might be on the right track, and realize you're probably going to lose some of that material at the end. So you're going to be a little bit long. Overplan.
I'm completely going to ignore your real world task because it looks like a world builder task.
Yeah, it kind of is.
Yeah, I'm gonna ignore that completely and say I'm sure a lot of you. It
wouldn't be my real world task unless you ignored it.
Yeah. We're so deep into all of our separation with COVID. Don't forget about the family you haven't talked to in a while. In some of your cases, like mine, that may be immediate family. Like I just got to see my mom the other day after having not seen her in almost a full calendar year. So, make some phone calls, say hellos. Video chatting is great. Zoom is awesome. So just check in with the people that you have not gotten to spend a lot of time with because of COVID and life.
Mm-hmm. And always remember to press record before you start your Zoom episodes. We did.
I was about to say, I know I
did.
hit that.
I was just
I'm like,
with you.
Yeah, you did. You really got me for a second there. I'm like, I know I did. And I'm looking around for the little recording indication. You suck, by the way.
Well, I double checked to verify it was there before I made the joke, and then realized, because if I made the joke and then realized that we had actually forgotten to record, that would have really sucked.
Yeah, that would have been really bad.
Okay.
Thanks for listening, guys.
Cut this off so you could process it. Oh. Thank you so much for listening to the World Builders Anvil.
We would love it if you would share the World Builders Anvil with 2 of your friends.
And so would they.
If they are unfamiliar with podcasts, then you get to introduce them to the wonderful world of podcasting.
Take them to Stitcher or iTunes, or best of all, just send them to our website, www.garduel.com.
That's GARDUL.com.
Now strike while the mithril's hot.